From Stuck to Scale, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses, your guide to navigating growth, transformation, and success in today's ever-changing business landscape. Each week, we'll dive into proven strategies, real-world case studies, and actionable insights designed to help small and mid-sized business owners scale smart, lead stronger, and grow faster. Let's get you unstuck and on the path to sustainable, scalable success. Now your host, Julio Gonzalez.
Welcome back to From Stuck to Scaled, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses. I'm your host, Julio Gonzalez, and every week we explore practical strategies, leadership insights, and real-world tools to help small and mid-sized businesses break through the barriers and grow with confidence. Today, we're attacking one of the most significant impacts to business, cybersecurity. This episode is for every business, especially those that think cybersecurity won't impact them. Let's get started. Today's guest is someone who lives at the intersection of technology, leadership, and security. Michael Goldstein is the CEO of LAN Infotech, an award-winning IT services firm based in Fort Lauderdale that helps organizations leverage technology to operate more securely and effectively. He's also the author of Cybersecurity, the Silent Battlefield, a practical guide that demystifies digital trends and equips business leaders with real-world strategies to defend their organizations. With decades of hands-on experience supporting small and mid-sized businesses, Michael knows firsthand how vulnerable many companies are and what it really takes to build resilience. Whether you're a founder, executive, or IT decision maker, you're going to walk away from this conversation with actionable steps to protect your business in a world where cyber risk is no longer just an IT issue. It's a boardroom concern. Michael, welcome to the show. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, Julio, thank you for having me. Looking forward to this session. Again, I'm Michael Goldstein. I'm president of LAN Infotech. We're a managed services IT company right here in Fort Lauderdale. So, doing a lot of work in the community, and of course, new Amazon bestseller author.
I was going to say, I've got your book here. I'm not sure if the screen is going to let me show the book. There it goes.
Yeah.
There's your book. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So it was an interesting endeavor of putting this together. I have a chapter with other authors that are there, but it's interesting in trying to put your thoughts down on paper. As you get to that stage of putting that in place, working with someone to come up with which makes me sound amazing, a bio. The back cover was probably harder than the book. I think when I read through it, I was like, oh my God, that's me. But, I really did think that cybersecurity was one of those really important things that, I won't say is overlooked, but gets worse by the day. And, we just don't see or hear it anymore. I think, the new news cycle doesn't report all of these things. And it's an easy way for the bad guys to mess with all of us as the end users, consumers, everyone out there. So I think it's an important piece to go out there and, keep doing these public service announcements.
No, absolutely. And I love that you have, the participation from all these other individuals. It gives the reader a lot of different perspectives and ideas of what's going on out there. What are you seeing out there today that's affecting small and mid-sized business? Because, as you know, I spent, my career in corporate America. So, corporate America sees things a little bit differently. How are you seeing small business being impacted?
So, I always inflect my personal experiences. So I'll just tell you two quick things and then go on to that. A few weeks ago, I was at Disney with my grandchildren at Epcot, watching my kids take pictures with Winnie the Pooh, and my phone starts like speed dial from a bank. Don't want to trash them
Sure.
on this, but speed dial kept coming across. On the fourth time, I picked it up. They identified themselves as the security branch of the security department of this branch of the bank. They proceeded to send me, hey, we want to identify ourselves with a text. please read us back the code, which is typical standard operating procedure.
Right.
Went through that, and as I'm listening, they kept talking about fraud happening on the account. They mentioned, do you know any of these following people? And they were illicit, they thought was fraudulent wire transfers. And then the light bulb went off, and I'm like, wow, I keep this specific account as a credit card only account. So I followed through a little, and they ended with the conversation of, listen, there are 3 IDs that are tied to this account. Can you tell me which one? I think we should suspend it right now. And of course, I gave them the one of the 2 that weren't mine. And within a second, the call was disconnected, and I did see it, hits on my getting emails that they were trying to get into my account. So here I am in the happiest place in the world, and lo and behold, there's no mercy on that. It did sound perfect. I called back the bank first of all, I took some time in the park on my secure VPN on the phone to be able to go out there and not only change the password, but change the user ID, because they did know it without me saying anything. They had my cell phone. So again, one way of consumers going out there. But for small businesses, every day, is a phishing day. You do some good things like the book, and that day I probably got the most hits of phishing emails coming to my business account. As a business, for at least me and accounting, we've blocked most personal emails from coming in. So now, yes, I have to accept a few Gmail accounts, but they're whitelisted. But all of the others, because I was getting bombarded.
Right.
Few times you're in the news or social media. Nothing. I'm not a celebrity. I'm just a business owner. So I think phishing is one of those, and some of those are really good. The one that I never want to praise them, but it was an email to me from a vendor per se that had an attached PDF that said, please pay this invoice. Michael Goldstein has authorized this. And then inside the email, they made it like there was a conversation, like a traditional Outlook conversation, that was me talking to the vendor saying, yeah, these are approved. And when I get a chance, I'll forward it to accounting, but please forward it. I mean, nicely written, could be something. But again, I think that, the tactics don't change there. There's just too many people out there that are falling for it. So I think that first of all is read, think, but more importantly have policies and procedures in place. Basic things like, hey, if someone changes, looking to change the wiring instructions, these are things that we can't fix and we can't block because the stuff looks too good. And on the reverse side of that, we have business owners that are sitting out there saying, I can't deal with this because you guys are blocking my emails.
Right.
So, we have this give and take of, if we put better procedures in place, I think that, and educate people. So we're out there in the community, whether it's, podcasts like this, thank you. We saw each other at a Broward County show. We do seminars, we do speaking. I think everywhere we go, we warn people and, try to help everybody to just have some awareness.
Yeah, the social engineering attacks are particularly bad because they're so easy to fall into. And I almost fell into one similar situation to yours. It was just a very hectic moment, and I get the call, and all of a sudden it was my Google ID, and it's like, what are you talking about? And it was just quicker to just go to the text and give them the number, and as soon as I did, it's like, wait a minute, what am I doing? you know um and I've been through the training. I gave the training. So all of these smaller businesses that aren't doing any training, that aren't getting these messages on a regular basis, they're especially vulnerable.
And we're taking an approach over the summer months that we're going back to every single customer that's there, because we do include some cyber awareness training inside of our managed services contract,
Mhm.
but we're going more to an interactive one. Listen, we all know the drill. At the beginning of the year, you watch the videos. Most of us could probably answer the 10, 15 questions, and then you're done. We're going to do continuous training. We're going to do it a little more gamified. We're gonna make sure that our customers understand. And it sounds kind of drastic, but every month there's extra credit that comes in, and it's not anything for them to take. It's like, hey, did you get that text from the cellular phone vendor, or we all get the Sun Pass
Right.
things? You know, these are what you should possibly do, and they're just awareness things. And we do want to have our customers give us the ability to fish them every other month. Now, one business owner said to me, that's kind of really excessive. I said, no, excessive would be every week. Every other month is not excessive, because you really want to, you want them to think twice before they click it. And if it slows someone down and saves one person, and then we are reporting back. We're going to have these monthly reports that are going to go out so that they can know. I'm trying to say it nice. I'll say, who's the most vulnerable?
Right.
Well, and I hate to say it, we have to keep it up. And we think that the summer is a great time to start, because the minute we got Labor Day, July 4th, Labor Day coming up, but I always look at the end of the year as the worst. You start
Yeah.
off with Halloween, we're leading up to Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah, whatever it is, and we want them to be better prepared, and that way. And we're not leading with, oh, this is what you have to do for compliance. This is the new way of life.
It's the new normal. Absolutely. What's the conversation that you're having directly with CEOs, other than the obvious, you need to have, regular training? How are you communicating to that level of business leadership?
I think we're just looking at the exposure. So we're coming at it from a couple pieces. With the advent of AI, I'll just use this as the excuse that people are looking for. I'll use an example of Microsoft Copilot. When people invest in this, now your document library is exposed to people potentially by accident finding things. So really, we're investing in a couple of tools. We have one today that we really just want to do a workstation scan, and very simple, 10 minutes, maybe the most. It could be an executable that we can deliver and let them know. And we want to scan a sample of workstations. So that gives us the report to see what they're doing on the workstations. We can't enforce browser. We all know that. Everyone has that beast. We're also just looking at a scan of 365, because we have those instances where people just say, I can't deal with two-factor authentication. As much as we beat them over the head, the guy's name's on the door. What are you going to do?
Right.
So we want to remind them with these executive reports of what we find. Secondly, on the document exposure, because we've lived through a couple of new customer exposures, and we want to scan everything on the network. And really what it does is the tools that we're looking at will look at what data is openly available, how much personal identifiable information, PII data in there, financial information. And then it really just does these metrics. All right, these are the files that we found. If on the dark web today, this data was available to them, this is your exposure. I don't tell them how many files, we could go in there, but a high level, if you got hacked, this is the data that was accessible by a normal user. And this is what your financial vulnerability could be. And it involves us to then conquer from a few fronts. Well, how would they get in if I'm paying you? Well, these are the things that we're looking at. And by the way, remember that workstation scan? Well, Joe over there, he saves all his passwords directly into, let's pick on Firefox, on that. And, by the way, with this generalized tool that I'm using, I see all of them. And hey, here's Joe's passwords, the first four characters. You notice something and it has the user ID. Oh, that's a school, but that's your company email. And now he or she is using that with very similar passwords that are in place there. So again, just showing you your vulnerability on that and what that translates to a monetary piece. And that's the discussion, because I can't talk about bells and whistles because the products change every day.
Right.
And I am a true believer in that for every lock, there is a key. So we're just putting a finger in another place, and we're trying to do common practices that won't change what they're doing, but letting you know that, hey, there will be a time that you have to clean up your data. And there will be a time that we have to figure this out. And most importantly, our trusted people are, even if they use a complex password, it's the same password. And then, where do we go with that is, what can we do? Easily fix it, password manager. Oh, it doesn't have a vulnerability. Well, does that have a vulnerability? Of course it does. But now that we're putting in a password manager, we're using a product that will give them monthly reports that will give them ratings. And the ratings are, hey, most of these password managers need a master password. It should be something complex. Oh, and gee, they shouldn't use that as one of their passwords. And then what it's doing is it gives them from a rating from 1 to 100 how secure their passwords are. Do you repeat it? So now we're kind of taking it to the next level that we told you to do something, we've implemented it, and now the tool gets abused. And we want to show you so that somebody could keep, like anything else. It's not that I could lose 40 pounds, that I'll gain it back if I don't change my lifestyle. So we have to change our computing lifestyle in the new world. And
Are you
go.
are you finding? I mean, because healthcare, for instance, has had to really get their act together over the years. We had HIPAA, then we had high tech. Are you finding um, industry segments that are less um, likely to take cybersecurity seriously?
Um, I think they all like to look at it. Recently, actually, we had to. My mom was in the hospital this past weekend, and you walk around and you look at like a hospital. I had a visitor sticker. I'm wandering around. I don't know how a healthcare facility, tends to care for patients, but then again, locks down their full security because with the badge, we're wandering around, we're looking at data's there. You know, it's hard for those places. And I look at it all the time. I'm looking at computers, I'm looking at data. You're there. It's pretty difficult. I think that as people start, I hate to say it, that it's the regulated industries that take it seriously, and sometimes to the extreme, which is great. The unregulated industries, they have to hear someone locally that had a problem. I happened to catch, one of the favorite shows I'm an addict of is 60 Minutes. Now in this off time, they have, 2 hours, Sunday nights, second hour, re-aired the show about, the Vegas break-ins, the Vegas, and then talked about Colonial Pipeline, and I remembered, when all those, at least the Colonial Pipeline and the meat company happened, there was a line that said, man, you take our gas and our food away, then people take it seriously. You're
Right.
worried about the casino, it's those people. So I think that, re-looking at this, history always repeats itself. And, we have to look at some of those industries that see what happened to them, but more like the local stories. It's terrible to hear about what happened in Las Vegas, but people are like, I'm not an MGM. You know, you're actually worse off because you look at what it could cost you in the big picture. And we've been saying for years is just a joke, and I think it never gets old. We're all one click away from going out of business.
That's right. One of the things I've been talking a lot about lately is the Chinese hack that's affecting the 150,000 websites. Just this week's podcast was on business continuity, and I brought up, having your information, what user accounts, do you have to access which systems and so forth. I know a small business, a restaurant whose website was compromised. I happened to run into it looking for their menu. I approached them because they're chamber members, and they were like, "Oh, we don't know who's managing that website for us."
Yeah.
And it's when you get to that level of lack of ownership, it's significant for these businesses. And their solution, since they couldn't figure it out, was they went to some menu vendor that's doing a new website for them, but that domain is kind of forever lost
Right.
to them. How do you get those smaller businesses to really get it?
So I will say that, we have, and it's been over the years, probably you and I go back a little with the gray hairs that are out there. We invest as a company into a lot of tools, and it's a per user per month kind of basis where, in our prime, you'd have to drop $50,000, $60,000 into something and live with it for a couple of
Right.
years. So we're trying to say that we can do these simple steps, and it's crawl, walk, run. I don't expect them to do everything. We do have a couple of very small businesses that understand where we put our security stack on the machines and they're better than the next guy. I'm still we did a site we're the cyber fit partner for the Florida Panthers Hockey Club. So for 3 years in a row, we got to use the arena for a small little summit. And last year's summit, this year we focused on AA, but last year, on year 2 of this, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back 10 years ago and I'm going to look at my PowerPoints because I still have them. And I'm like, you know what? This is kind of funny because I'm preaching the same thing. We show the passwords, we go through this, and I brought up a couple things, and it's the same kind of thing. Post-its on the board, the same passwords. I think there's some more sophisticated things like, hey, if you buy a TV, it's Wi-Fi enabled. We got to fix those things. I mean, there's newer things, but I will say that other than the ugly graphics from 10 years ago, I took a chunk of that same and piece and I did it. And then I included a picture that I had presenting of this at the end of the event. People were asking questions. I'm like, I told them the story. Here's the original PowerPoint. Here's the jazzed up one. Same stuff. So, history repeats itself. We have to take to this and change pieces and give them, I think we do have better tools today. 10 years ago, we're like, oh, get rid of Norton. Let's do something more antiseptic. Let's put a spam filter in, So for us now, even on the emails, we say, listen, I'm not going to be able to fix that small business is everything. Let's take the low hanging fruit. So for now, we put an email system in place that will, every email coming in has a little banner on it. And the banner will say first time sender. It'll turn red if there's financial information. So we're putting banners that kind of smack them in the face. And we've come up with this term, and it's been around for a while, but there's a gray mail folder. Well, what do we need? What red's bad, white's okay. What's gray? And you might subscribe to the Chamber newsletter, and it comes from one of those mass marketers. So we put everything that we think is gray in this folder, and then you tell us if it's spam or safe. So we're trying to put the onus back on them, or at least smack them in the face a little. Yeah. And then first-time senders are important things. Things that turn red say, wow, someone might just send me a question on an invoice. And that shows up as sensitive financial information. And the other piece that you asked earlier, what industries? We're finding a lot of these industries, send critical information to, someone's AOL, Gmail, Yahoo account, and they don't encrypt it. Oh, encryption's such a pain. Well, that's how the bad guys get all that information, because if 25 people are CC'd on that, people always say, well, that's not, how'd they get me? I must have been hacked. No, you're sending information out to your personal emails, and you're not encrypting it, because anybody that gets that now has that info. So we're trying to just change some habits that are small monthly things. And I'm happy if someone just takes a good security piece of software on the machines and they let us, they let us implement some email security. It's not the end all to end all, but to walk into a small business and say, hey, this firewall is going to cost you $900 up front. Every year it's going to be $700. I sometimes can't get that across to small businesses. So right. I'm happy with little wins and being accessible and letting them be a little worried on how we put it. Don't use the public Wi-Fi. It's things that I've been talking about for years.
And I often get questions. What's the best antivirus? What's the best mail protection tool? And I always answer the same thing. It's the one that works for you,
right?
Because they all work. They all have their gaps. But whatever you have installed is better than nothing. So at least do something.
The only thing I add to that is as long as you're paying for something. So right. So I usually say, listen, if you don't want to work with, you don't want to pay us, you want to walk in there, walk into one of those consumer shops, the color of the rainbow, pick your favorite color. They're better than nothing. But I think that we try to put a comprehensive program in place for them that is a reasonable type price. And then for some of those businesses, they're like, hey, I never have any computer problems. Fine, buy the software from me, and here's your discounted rate. We're trying to help. And through our community service people, like Glenn Benjamin and working in the chamber, we're always out there. And it's not just talking to the businesses. We've worked. We go out and South Florida Institute for the Aging. We help do webinars for the elderly. We have we're out there talking in schools. We're out there talking in various organizations at a very I'll call it low level, not a high level. Give them the basics.
No, and I do have to give you guys major credit because you are out there in the community, having so many conversations that others aren't. You mentioned Glenn. I've known Glenn for 13, 14 years or so at this point, and he's out there every day advocating, for privacy, for security, so that everybody gets it. So you guys definitely have to be commended for that.
And I think that, when you talk about sometimes, when we do an event, some of my deck is some specifics, some statistics so people can see. I usually show, we're a big sonic wall firewall vendor. There's a great little map that I put up that, kind of looks like a 1980s video game. It's the data attacks to and from the United States only for this one vendor. It's a great little entry. Like people are attached to that. And we talk about that. I talk about realistic things that happen to me. Sometimes I'm taking pictures of things. I own a Wi-Fi sniffing device, called the Pineapple. And it's one of those things that I think that I don't turn it on. I talk about it. I tell them that I bought this. God, it's probably 7 years ago. 7 years, and no one's come arresting me. It's readily available for these bad guys. So we just kind of show them some realistic things and stuff, because yes, it's terrible to hear about the big guys, but the little guys don't ever think that they're a target like the big guys. So we want them to understand, and the days of the fear, we try fear tactics go nowhere. We just want to show them some realistic things. So if I see something, I capture a picture of it. I think that at my last security event, I hadn't used my Pineapple device in a long time. So what I did is I told them the story that I went out. It's in my backpack. I went out to a Starbucks. We could say those at that. And I put on the device, and it started gathering stuff, and I turned and stuck it in my bag, left. And later that afternoon, it was kind of funny that I had another appointment at another Starbucks, and this was a newer Starbucks. And I'm doing my stuff, doing some work, and I didn't realize that I didn't turn the Pineapple device off. And you rarely see phones going off at Starbucks. And it looked like the people were looking around. And I'm like, I'm getting a little paranoid. I'm like, wait, did I turn off that Pineapple device? And I didn't. I was like, oh man, turned it off, left, and that was it. So, there are some good places that it looks for this. And I wasn't doing anything, just wanted to see if it still worked.
Sure.
Gather some basic statistics. And then I tell them that to protect about those things, I don't use public Wi-Fi unless I have a good VPN in place there. If I could tether, I would tether. And I tell them the dumb stories. I'm one of those where don't want to plug in my phone charger at an airport. I've seen too much of the easy, low-hanging fruit, or that looks like the Wi-Fi that's on there. And I tell them the story that I own this device. If I turned it on, it takes a little to program it, but you could gather information. And it's something simple like that. So if one person comes up to me, and a lot of people do come up and they tell me, yeah, I saw a weird, guy with, standing in the corner with Wi-Fi, or there was another Wi-Fi that was broadcasting, or you know what, Mike, I was in this public place and I tethered my phone. Thank you for telling me about that. I felt more comfortable there. Maybe they didn't do the 12 other things, but they weren't on, public Wi-Fi that they weren't sure of. So, I'll take low hanging fruit, because I think it's we could use the word epidemic status, and it has been that. The numbers for the Verizon report that's been around for a long time are crazy numbers.
Yeah, the continuous education is something that, I've been doing for many years, because the days of, going to a board of directors and telling them that the sky is falling, that ended a long time ago, and that never worked. So the continuous education and doing that at the consumer level,
Yeah.
right? Because so many employees take work home. I had somebody in HR a couple of years ago emailing herself employee appraisals to her personal, email address at home, and it's like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
And it's that continuing that education at all levels, and reminding them, not letting them know, but reminding them that what they do at home has direct implications for the work at the office.
I
And
always
just
I always
reminding them all the
say,
time.
I always sit there and say, so for, I have three boys, and, oldest is 38. And I always coach them. I always coach them in basketball, soccer. It was fun for me. Not that I was ever an athlete, but I figured that, if you could teach them, you know, good things to take back. And one of the things that I relate to this is, I used to always have come in, and I always used to tell the kids, and I mean, they started young all the way up till they were in high school. And we do these little things, the difference in a Miami Heat win or loss, any NBA team, free throws and layups. And that's a lot of the stuff we practice on. And I always said, why they're like, why are we doing this? I might not get fouled. Why are we spending all this time? And I'm like, what you do in practice is what you do in the game. And I remember going through that, and I kind of said the same thing where you're just going up there. The guy that doesn't care uses that personal email,
Right.
doesn't never patch their machines. Why do I need antivirus? It's the same thing. Now you know that those are the people that probably have terrible practices overall. And I bring that story. I tell that story like 5 times a week. It's the same kind of thing as you're talking to people, and it's because our lifestyle changed post COVID. There's a lot of people working, those off hours to cover for things,
Mhm.
and we emphasize that I don't want to take that old baggage of stuff that they're going to slip on the USB stick, you know. And bring it back in, or lots of times in our firm, it sounds you bring that up. We actually block access for people, for a lot of our clients, of accessing the Gmails from within their corporate network, because I don't want to test the lower end defenses. I'm like, why are we putting all these things if someone could just go to their Gmail account on their
Right.
business machine? That's what they got their devices for. So I think that sometimes it's common sense of little things, and web filtering. Go out there. We've seen over the past 6 months, in a lot of the browsers, that email gets compromised. And an email get compromised because they clicked on something, and then it installs something inside the browser. You're like, oh, what's that? Not a big deal. So we're trying to cover things, and what we really aim to do, especially with today's business professional, is not make them jump through hoops to do their work and hide it. This is what we really want to do. So we're on remote devices. We're always putting an always on VPN, so they don't have to think about it. And we'll do that. And then sometimes an instance that's also a web filter. So we'll block things, and then we'll have to open things up at some point. And then people that really take it seriously, it's like, hey, give them a laptop in the office, let them take it home, because no one wants to provide one in the office and the home.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of people get to that environment, and that device is secured in both locations, because God forbid, you get an extra 2FA, right? You know, the world comes to an end. So
Right.
trying to make it simple, and at that C-level, understanding that we're putting layers in place. And, like in the old days, if we traveled outside the country, we'd have to let our credit card company know. We're doing those same basic things. Hey, you got any employees outside the US? Well, someone tries to log in outside of the United States, but then there's that guy that travels to Spain and flips
Doesn't
out
say anything.
and can't get into his email. So I think, trying to use common sense is probably the best approach. And then common sense to dollars and cents. What's going to be your biggest bang for that buck? And then what more can you plan? So I'm always a believer that, you got to let them know what the full proposal is. You got to know what the price of the Ferrari is, and all the reason why it's that high. You don't have to buy it, but you got to know the options. So at least you can budget for those things, that maybe the board or the CFO will approve. And if you, I don't want to keep going back to the well, but these are the 12 things that you'll do. This is what it's going to cost you per user. I don't know, I can't. All right, let's figure out what's important. What bigger defenses could we put up that will have the most bang for your buck? But that will not, I will not stop nagging you on the next quarter's budget, the next year's budget, because all of these things are important. Because you get it also. What's the best thing I could do? There isn't the best. They're all the right things to do. We have to pick it out, and it's because if you fill out a personal liability insurance, there is an omission insurance policy. There's a lot of things that are on there now that pertain to this. And there's no more, you're filling out the 6th generation photocopy. These insurance companies are actually looking back at the low hanging fruit. And they're like, hey, you told me you didn't have this on there. We just did a little hit on your website. So, God forbid you need the insurance and then you kind of misportrayed what you put on there. So we're trying to give them the real life, what could happen. And yet you're paying for insurance, but you're not following the pieces. Same kind of thing. So,
yeah, and they don't realize that if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, the insurance is going to say, well, yeah, you have the coverage, but you didn't do it. So guess what? You're not covered.
A lot of large cases out there where travelers insurance suing their clients. They filed claims that were out there when they went back, wasted all the time, went back there, and you guys said you had all this. Remember that, Bach? So, we're making sure that when they ask us for, to look at those things or ask those questions, we're making sure that they understand, hey, you didn't have that. It's sort of like going for life insurance and saying, yeah, I'm a smoker, I'm a drinker, and I really like to parachute.
I like that analogy.
Right? Oh, you don't have a VPN. No, I have RDP, all the things that people are listening. We all look at the insurance and then you can't lie about it. What if you had to claim, there's some, do you do any of these things? Oh yeah, I just happened to, that was my last jump and, now no one can get that. So I think that, it's truthful and letting them understand the ramifications of not doing this. And, you can't hide it. In our state, you got to report it. You have a certain amount of time to report it. God forbid, we went through this where we picked up a client where their data got exfiltrated, stolen. And then as they started analyzing it, as they were being, blackmailed, there's no nice way to say it, they had all this old employment data. And in the case where we were working on it, basically they said, hey, I don't care that John Smith hasn't worked for you in 5 years. If John Smith, after that period of time, lived in North Carolina, then lived in Arizona, then California, you're going to apply to all those things. You got to hunt these people down, let them know. Because if they found out something later, you're liable. So, when you ask, it's dollars and cents. You're keeping this information. The bad guys are finding that they can't get caught, so blackmail is the way to go. It's definitely a crazy world we're living in.
And that blackmail is really easy for them.
It is, and there's no mercy. There's no mercy on that. These guys find a way, and that's why we kind of tell people, if you're regulated, and yes, if you had a larger budget, we want to get all these data points, because sometimes you think they're sneaking in the back window, but they're really coming in the front door.
Right.
And you put out that fire, and next thing you know, you think you're safe, and 4 days later, the partners in the law firm will get pictures of the data that the bad guy stole. So it's constantly keeping your guard up, looking for those things, and where we can show things. In the cases that we've been involved in, got to delete the data of what we had, but people can only see what we've seen out there, and to feel that violated, and just being blackmailed, and figuring those pieces out, or the hoops that you have to jump through just to protect yourself.
Coming off conversation here, do you want to talk about any of the work that you guys are doing with human trafficking?
So I always, the first year was 3 years ago. It was our first cyber summit with the Florida Panthers. And we didn't want, it was a first time event for us, and we've always looked at cyber byproducts. That's what we'll call it. We talked about blackmail, all those. And we started doing a lot of looking and investigating, and we realized that the dark web is a bad source for everybody. Um, but if you're in that human trafficking area, it's a wealth of knowledge. We started. I remember doing my first post COVID event, where I was the cyber speaker in a trafficking event. Where they wanted to talk about this. Unfortunately, I was the fourth speaker, and the first three, um, for one time, I was at a loss of words, and it was enlightening for me to hear, the stories. I mean, I couldn't work the rest of the day, or the day after, because I was sitting next to the speakers, and it takes hearing detectives, hearing the stories of this. So at LAN, we decided to focus a little on cyber, but also talk about the byproducts. Human trafficking is a terrible byproduct on that. We also did a couple things with Broward County Public Schools, and you hear what goes on in the world at that, and the education discussions you have to have. So we're always trying to talk to people about this. We talk many times to people in high school. I hate to say, I wouldn't go much younger, but teachers, people, and looking for these signs. We did a few years ago. We were on Broward County Public Schools. I think they called it Parent University, and my job was to talk about how we could be better involved in looking at what's going on in teenagers' phones, having those discussions. And I remember that event as we were planning for it. I was like the sixth or seventh speaker. They had a district attorney on there. They had police, and it was like, I was super moved to hear that. And I have 4 grandchildren, under 5, and I start thinking what kind of world we leave for them. And the questioning when we put the Broward County schools together is, what apps do you use? And then as they were interviewing the students put together these things, you hear the things that I wouldn't want to discuss that were out there. And feeling like you have to tell people that there are tools, free tools, easy tools. You have to be aware of what's going on there, because the younger generation are more susceptible to this, and the bad guys have all that data. And at our first event, we brought up someone to talk about the trafficking. She was an ex beauty pageant speaker, and she talked about her foundation. And typically you hear these stories, you might equate it to someone that might be drug or alcohol problems, but here she spoke from power of the reverse, where she was bullied because of who she was and what with that, and felt compelled to talk on that other side of the story. And we brought her up there. I had spoken to her a couple times, and you're just glued at the end of your seat, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I should have given them the whole discussion. But cyber leads to a lot of different things that are there, and unfortunately, the bad guys in that side of it, have access to data. The social engineering is even harder. Well, I'll say easier, but harder on today's youth. I never thought we'd have to worry about that. We always thought about, oh, there's that guy. He looks a little weird. Go the other way, and now you're just not sure who it is at the other end of that. TikTok or Instagram or chat in some of these things. It's just a terrible piece. So we want to let people know about it, and we're always available to talk to organizations of how to better protect, or at least look at and have those discussions, and what tools you could possibly do to limit the phone usage, or going out there and at least monitor what sites people.
So, Michael, we commit to our listeners that each week they'll receive some actionable tips they can implement immediately to improve their business. We've covered a lot of areas around cyber today. What are a couple of things that our listeners can do to secure their businesses?
So I think you brought up a couple of things that were really good. Understand, put policies and procedures in place. Let people know, what you're monitoring, what you're not monitoring. I think it's super important that if you're a small business, please go out there, have some antivirus, have a better better than a consumer grade antivirus. Train your employees, put a firewall in place. Basic things that every consumer, I try not to use public Wi-Fi because you don't know what you're doing. We all don't know what the Wi-Fi is. Use a VPN. A lot of great tips. I'll just say that, and I'll close it with this: is keep your software up to date. One of the great things about Apple is that, listen, that little number comes up on the control panel to tell you when you have a patch. And they nudge you till you get it. So like that on your PC, make sure that you apply updates, pay for software. I hate to say it, you have to pay for it, because in the end, when you have a problem, you got to be able to call someone. And then if you have an issue, call a professional. Again, at the least, take that PC and carry it into one of the vendor, one of the stores. Geek Squad's one of those. If you're a business, call a professional. It's super important that this doesn't spread, and the longer you wait, the more vulnerable you are.
And I'm going to bring one up that I had completely forgotten about that you mentioned, but plugging into public USB outlets to charge. Do not do that. Take your charging brick with you. Plug that into the electrical outlet and plug into your own charging brick, because there's too many risks out there with plugging into an open USB that could have been compromised. That's unfortunately become a big thing.
And if you don't believe us, Google it, YouTube it. You will be amazed how easy it is for the bad guys, and you will never know. Your data could be extracted fully from your phone. And think about all the stuff that you and I keep on our phone to run our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and all the super insightful information. Congratulations again on the book. I got to stop this background blurring thing. Where can our listeners find you?
So I am Michael A. Goldstein on LinkedIn. The easiest way to find me, ping me on there. I respond all the time. LANinfotech.com is our website. And email us. We can put you on our web tips email. That's all we do. You opt in once, and weekly we send out some really good basic tips for everybody. We will not spam you. You will opt in or opt out at any point in time, but we do that for the community, and they are great tips.
I get them weekly, and it is one of those things that I read every week. It does not just go into the trash can. So that is definitely a great read each week. So that's join the mailing list and get those. Pay special attention to those.
We are here for you guys. We are always available for questions. It is one of those things, and we really believe in community, and we all have to chip in to stop this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for listening to the latest episode of From Stuck to Scaled, and thanks again to Michael Goldstein of LAN Infotech. Before you go, you've gotten a lot of great insights today. Don't do nothing. Implement one of those tools, all of those tools, and share those with a friend or colleague that may need to also protect their business. Share today's episode with anyone that you think may need to hear this. Subscribe so that you get onto the podcast notifications each week and learn all the new strategies from our great guests every single week. I will see you next time. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to From Stuck to Scaled, growth strategies for small and mid-sized businesses, produced by Optocution LLC. For more information, tools, and resources, check out our website www.redefinepossible.co/podcast.